Okay, so what we're starting on now, since we finished the Pear Deck, is the additional vocab support. Remember to put your class number up here. And then this is the additional vocab support. So on the left side, they actually show you a proof, which I'm going to talk through, and then they have some vocabulary questions related to that. So in the problem it says, how can you prove the converse of the same side interior theorem? What we're given is that 3 and 5 are supplementary, and we want to prove those lines parallel. So first off, these are the lines A and B that they want to prove parallel, and this one would be your transversal. So I usually darken the transversal, and we're given that 3 and 5 are supplementary. So we start with the given information, which says that, and then it says use the definition of supplementary angles. On that, talking about 3 and 1, 3 and 1 are a linear pair. Angle 3 and angle 1 are a linear pair. And so that means adjacent and supplementary. Remember that supplementary means it adds up to 180. So anytime it's like an acute and an obtuse angle that forms a straight line, or even two 90-degree angles that form a straight line, then that'd be linear pair. And a linear pair is adjacent and supplementary. The next part is they have 5 congruent to 1. They say recognize that supplements of the same angle are congruent. So in other words, they're saying 3 and 5 are supplementary and 3 and 1 are supplementary, so your 3's cancel out. And so that's 5 congruent to 1. So that's called congruent supplements. Congruent supplements. Okay. And then the next part is you actually look at what type angles 5 and 1 are. 5 and 1 are 1 exterior and 1 interior, so that's corresponding. So angle 1 and 5 are corresponding angles. Corresponding angles since 1 exterior and 1 interior. Corresponding angles since 1 exterior and 1 interior. So, bless you. Recall that if corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So that's this. Sometimes they have it as a sentence, and sometimes they say converse of corresponding. It means the same thing. Converse of corresponding. So remember when we talk about converse, you first had your conditional statement, which is P to Q, and your converse would be Q to P. So you're just switching those. So that's what we're talking about. There was also inverse, which is not P to not Q, and contrapositive, which is not Q to not P. And we talked about those before. Right now we're just focusing on the converse. So we're not negating anything or taking away any knots. All we're doing is we're switching the order. So basically switch your hypothesis and conclusion. Switch your hypothesis and conclusion. And that's what I'm actually going to put up here. What does converse mean? It's when you switch the hypothesis and conclusion without negating. Without negating. When you switch the hypothesis and conclusion without negating it. In other words, all you do is you switch the order. Any questions? Okay, then it says, what does given mean? It's information listed in the problem statement. In the problem statement. So it says given angle 3 and 5 are supplementary. That's our given statement. So that's what we know. It's a fact that we know. It's a fact known. Okay, then the next part says what are supplementary angles? They're angles that add to 180. Angles that add to 180 or form a straight line, which is also called straight angle. Angles that add to 180 or form a straight line or straight angle. Angles that add to 180 or form a straight line / straight angle. Okay, the next thing says, what does that symbol stand for? It's congruent. It basically means equal, except we would use equal with numbers and congruent with symbols and letters. Number 5, how do corresponding angles correspond with each other? Basically, they are in corresponding locations. They are in corresponding locations. One is exterior and one is interior. So like we've talked about before, if you want to use patty paper or trace it or just translate it down and move it, it would be the same size. So like if you copied this and then just moved it, it'd be the same size. So they are in corresponding locations. One is exterior and one is interior. Any questions? Okay. So now that we're done with that, here's the reteaching. And there's your first parts, which you can look at with your types of angles. Like 1 and 5 are corresponding. 3 and 6, alternate interior. 3 and 5, same side interior. And 2 and 7, alternate exterior. And here's a sample problem, which is using alternate exterior and setting it equal and solving. What we're doing for the exercises is it says which line or line segments are parallel and justify your answers. So the first thing you do is you look at which angles are marked, and then you darken your transversal. So this is your transversal. And that's going to be dB. Your transversal is dB. And then your lines that are parallel are going to be AB and CD. AB parallel to CD. Now on both of these, what I did is I used arrows for everything because throughout the whole thing they had arrows. So remember those. And also remember that the letters can be switched on segments and on lines, just not on rays. Okay, for number 2, we've got these angles, and so this is your transversal, but that doesn't have arrows. So we're going to say XY with a bar is the transversal. XY with the bar is the transversal. And so it would be WX parallel to YZ. WX parallel to YZ. So these two need arrows because they're in the drawing. Again, like we talked about before, if this is your line and this is your transversal, that's how that angle is formed. And if this is your line and that's your transversal, that's how this angle is formed. So that's how you can figure out which lines are parallel. Number 3 has these angles marked, so this would be your transversal. So QO is the transversal. And they left off the letter P right there. So it's QNOP. So that's the quadrilateral. And so it won't be QP parallel to NO. Because it's not this angle, it's that angle. And so it's going to be QN. It's QN parallel to PO. So QO is the transversal, and it's QN parallel to PO. Any questions? Okay, the next one has these angles congruent, which are corresponding. So the top thing we're going to write is corresponding. And the next thing we're going to do is, if this is 126, then this is 126. So I put the 126 and circle it, because it's going to want X, but it also wants the labeled angle. And the next thing you do is actually set them equal and find X. So we have 2X plus 16 equal 126. So from there, you subtract 16, and so we get 2X equal 110, and so X is 55. X is 55. So if you plug it in, 2 times 55 is 110, plus 16 is 126. So that's when it's corresponding angles. This is your next type, which are same side interior. So we write SSint. Now, one easy way to remember that you don't set them equal is because if you're doing 6 times something and 20 times something, just minus 2, the 20x minus 2 is going to be much bigger. So don't set those equal. We want to say 20x minus 2 plus 6x equal 180. And then combine your like terms. So 20x plus 6x is 26x. And then add 2. So you have 182. And when you divide, you get 7. So you end up with x equals 7. It also wants the measure of each labeled angle. So this one would be 6 times 7, which is 42 degrees. And this one, you do 20 times 7 minus 2, and you get 138. So this is 138 degrees. Another way to check is if you do 180 minus 42, you also get 138. So that's how you check your answer and make sure you know that you're right. Any questions? Okay, on number 6, this is your transversal. And so these would be alternate exterior. And so you set them equal. 4x minus 18 equal 3x plus 6. You could have done it the other way, but I like having the bigger x on the left because I'm going to subtract 3x, have x minus 18 equal 6, and then add 18, so I get x is 24. So remember, if you want to think about this being a brick wall, and so you don't do 4x plus 3x gets 7x. Make sure you solve your equations properly. The last part we need to do for this is to plug it in. I'd rather plug it into the one with the plus sign because that's easier. So 3 times 24 plus 6. 3 times 24 plus 6. That gives you, whoops, I did a typo. 3 times 24 plus 6, 78. And if you did 4 times 24 minus 18, you also get 78. So that's how you know you did it right. So both of these are 78 degrees. Remember, they were alternate exterior, and so they were equal. The next part has your sample problem, and then this part. So what we're doing to start with is being given L is parallel to M, so that's what we put here. So that's L parallel to M is given. The next thing is we need to use angle 1 congruent to angle 3, which is corresponding. So in this case, we do know those angles are equal. So we know those lines, we know the lines are parallel, so we know those angles are equal. The other thing that we know is 1 and 2 are a linear pair. Angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary is how this is worded, but they are a linear pair. So that blank is linear pair. And then if we have 1 congruent to 3 and angle 1 right here, then we can substitute and we can say 3 and 2 are supplementary, which is the same as A. So angle 3 and angle 2 are supplementary. And here we can say congruent supplements or substitution. The last part of this is writing this flow proof. And so what we start with is the angle 2 congruent to angle 3, which is given. So we basically do this from left to right. We also know that 2 and 1 are vertical angles. So angle 2 congruent to angle 1 because vertical angles are congruent. And we use those two inputs to form a statement. So again, to start with, we have 2 congruent to 3, which is given, and then 2 congruent to 1 from vertical angles. Think of your 2's as canceling, so then we put angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. And that's going to be transitive. Now you look at what type angles 1 and 3 are and their corresponding angles. So that leads us to A is parallel to B, which is what we were trying to prove. And that's going to be converse of corresponding. Converse of corresponding. Or you could say, if you have corresponding angles that are congruent, then lines are parallel. Okay, so that's the end of that assignment, so you should turn that in now.